Yes, sure.
Hello. So we're back for the final sections, wrapping up. Just kind of thinking of the themes that were opened up during these 2 days. I want to kind of try to classify things. Since we talked about classifications, so I saw 3 major topics. One is systems of knowledge, right? So different contexts of understanding what a bird is, right? So I think one of the things came out is how do we define birds? For that, we need criteria, right? And sometimes criteria clash.
I'm gonna get some water.
And what I've noticed is how difficult it is to unlearn to see scientifically, right? To see in terms of our current classification for it. Right? We have to relearn what was a bird in different historical contexts, in the Asian, right? And sometimes we saw names of birds being repurposed, right? So the same name can mean a different bird or even different animal. And this relates to this other kind of compartment about heuristics. So the use of a bird or a name of a bird. What was a bird good for? Right? It could be used for satire, could be used for ritual, could be used for its feathers. And again, all these contexts, we saw the architectural context, right? There's a spatial context. And when we talk about use, we saw we have the papers from Yamin Wang, Lydia Kiva, and Nyoto, one of the chicken, right? The use of chickens for different purposes. But I think all of the papers touched on also system of classifications. So I think use is a kind of category that we can define better and think about what birds. Meaning of birds is also related to their function. Right? And then depiction, right? How do you depict birds, right? And here we could have visual depictions or textual or architectural, right? Or artifactual depictions. And also from my own research point of view, I saw a difference between skins, so preserved birds and live birds. What matters when you depict a bird? Is it its features, also its vividness, its aliveness? I didn't see any mentions of the voice of birds. I thought that was
Long crowing.
Okay,
They were bred for their voices, some of them.
Okay, then I stand corrected. But I expected more, because also in Buddhist context we have these winged beings that are supposed to have wonderful voice. So it depends on the papers, but and I mentioned winged beings, so we were talking how to redefine. Maybe birds are not the best. Huh?
Well, from what I've learned in these 2 days, even though we work in different disciplines and on different regions, it transpires. I would like to emphasize 2 points. It transpires that birds represented on pre-modern and early modern, as well as probably relatively modern recent art, are characterized by wings and tail feathers. That's what I've learned from papers of Lydia Kivan, Ellen Nyoto, Radu, Marta, Sharon. What is important are actually wings and tail feathers. This makes perfect sense because these are the elements that the bird uses to fly. And this, probably in ancient, pre-modern, early modern cultures, this trespass of the boundaries was what defined the bird. But at the same time, it can include insects, it can include bats. So the birdiness is really a category of trespassness through flight. While on the other hand, we should have a look at that, probably in the future. Wingless birds maybe not count as birds, as Gregory Falls proved for some land-dwelling birds. They are not considered birds in their context in Flores, in island in eastern Indonesia. So this pre-modern classification is really worth of revisiting, basically. As for me, it's quite clear that wings and tail feathers are emphasized in all pre-modern cultures as a crucial sign of birds, while our modern categories are basically based on Linnean zoological systems where birds are classified according to skeleton, right? And skull shapes and head shapes, basically. And features of their legs, basically. Wings are not that important, actually, and feathers. So that's quite clear. And second point, well, is related, is this trespassing of the boundaries. Ellen just suggested at the corridor that we should extend the approach to Oceania, to other cultures, probably the mainland China, just to see the wider picture, because, well, being focused on Southeast Asia and basically Chinese relations with Southeast Asia may be a little bit narrowing, and Japan, of course, is also island culture, so maybe we should also include other parts of Asia to see the picture more clearly. On the other hand, it would be very difficult to work on a topic on this scale, so I'm not quite sure still. But anyway, what is clear from the papers of Tom, Hogerworst, and others is that we really need to look again on what is the bird for pre-modern culture, how it functions as a kind of messenger or, you know, power that can trespass boundaries that are difficult to reach by human beings, like high mountains, paradise, hell. We also seen that there are birds inhabiting hellish environment in some cultures, especially in Buddhist culture. So that's probably the most interesting aspect that we should look in more detail, probably in the future, just to redefine the category of birdiness in pre-modern cultures. It's more vital than what we've expected when we probably started to do our papers or to prepare our papers. So yeah, that's what I would like to emphasize as two most important aspects I learned. From practical side, it's clear to me that really wings, feathers, tail feathers, that's very important. That's something we should really look at more carefully. And second, it's this trespassness, this power of birds to fly high and to reach the places that are beyond the reach of our human mortals. So basically, that's quite interesting finding for me, at least for me. And voices. Marta mentions that Radu mentions actually, Marta objects to that we did not discuss much sounds. We didn't talk much about sounds and bird voices and bird calling. That's true, but probably it's because we really did study depictions of birds. Most of us work on depictions, either in texts, representations of birds, if you like, in texts or in the art, in the visual art. So maybe that's the reason that we simply didn't have much focus on voices of birds. If you would work on songs in relation to birds, then I am sure that we will have many contributions on bird voices. But anyway, that's also an important aspect, definitely, and we should consider it in depth in the future, because, for example, from my own field, as Lydia Kivan mentioned earlier today, Kakavin poems, old Javanese poems, were not read. They were not used for silent reading, neither for loud reading. They were sung. They were sung. They are metrical poems. They were sung. We know that quite well. There is quite persuading evidence that they were they were sung, and even in modern Bali, Kakavin poems are delivered by the form of songs, basically. So yeah, that's another aspect we should probably consider more carefully. Yeah.
That's good. I think we can open up and invite your comments and maybe your own impression, what struck you from the papers these 2 days. Do you want to say?
Well, I would just add to the categories that you suggested, wild versus domestic. So domesticated birds, even in the ducks that Sharon showed us, the ones that they're holding under their arms are not the same as the wild birds. And certainly in Japan, and I would imagine in other places, the reaction or the ideas around the birds have a lot to do with whether they're wild or domesticated. So.
For me, just want to,
for me, it's really inspiring for Vado or even the mother's work in Japan, because when I asked about Mandarin ducks, because for my research, I think that it's quite different from other papers, because we mainly focus on the general study about birds. But when I come across with Mandarin ducks, because it's in pairs, so I need to deal with somehow the, should I say, gender study about the birds. So I just recognized, it's really interesting, because for both Chinese ceramics and Southeast Asian ceramics, they quite often only put the male Mandarin duck in the artifacts. But when you tell me, I think later I will look into the Japanese ceramics, especially for Mandarin duck. Did they mainly focus, also have the artifacts for the male Mandarin duck? Because it's very distinctive, as you can see there. It's mainly pairs, right? So I think for the gender, or should I use gender also, just sex? Sure. Yeah, it's also another important aspect to understand the birds, even including the peacocks, phoenix, because phoenix is very female oriented. Yeah, so it's another angle for me to think deeply about its linkage with East Asian arts.
I would like to add that we also stumble upon upon the fusion of real birds and mythological birds in a way that's quite enriching, and the boundary can be very in flux. Actually, it's not settled. It's just, as Radu has perfectly demonstrated, it can be really following different ways of transmission. So one bird can be presented in different ways through just diverse ways of transmission. That's also quite important. And another point that's in need of more research, definitely, is just the aspect of non-animal aspect of birds, what I would call. That's simply how bird becomes non-bird in a way that it becomes hybrid creature, like chimera or whatever. Is this still bird? Would people who produce the images call it the bird? I'm not that sure. So maybe basically we should also go both ways, not just consider the idea proven by linguists that bird can be, that reptile or even cattle can be a kind of bird, but the other way, can these creatures still be called birds by local societies in their own environment? Let's say in Cambodia in the 12th century, or you see, Sharon, you've also shown us some vessels that are decorated by non-real birds. Obviously, a kind of how would people interpret these forms? I mean, was it for them a bird or just a kind of?
It's mainly in Vietnam.
Oh yeah,
As in-
that was
it's
Vietnam,
very
right?
impactful for the Confucianism from China.
Okay.
Yeah, but compared with Thailand and also Cambodia, it seems like it's not that kind of so-called phoenix in that culture.
I just looked at the the Metropolitan Museum to see what they had. They have 2 incense burners of just a male mandarin duck, and 1 incense burner set with a male and female. I'll show you.
Is that from Japan?
Yeah, these are in the Metropolitan.
Or in the Met? Yeah, I can check.
So you can see most of the pictures, it's always paired. But this is interesting because it's incense burners with a pair. But here's incense box, or incense box, 2 boxes.
Martha, maybe you want your microphone so that our audience can hear you.
But I just wanted,
Yeah, you can see the sail.
yeah,
Sail obvious in male.
yeah. So
Also, in Japan also have only the male.
it looks
Is
like.
it mainly in LOP?
Well, the interesting thing is that these are boxes, right? Covered boxes to put the incense in to store it. So I'm wondering if it wasn't influenced by Southeast Asian ceramics. Because I haven't.
Yeah, I will think about that. It takes another paper to.
Another paper. But
Japan is like. I will check on the net.
okay.
So, thank you.
Sorry,
for
I didn't mean to hijack. Sorry.
I believe
I didn't
that
mean to, but.
But thank you for your clarification. Yeah, I check about the Edo period objects.
Okay, I will pass the microphone.
I got one. Thank you, Julie. I actually don't got too much to say, but I want to thank all speakers today for the 2 days, especially for me, someone from the field of Chinese art, wasn't aware of the importance of the Southeast Asia, especially for studying the birds. What's so important, I didn't realize that. So it's made me rethink about some past project or future project, how to deal with Southeast Asia. I think it's very important. One thing that this conference made me aware of it, not only the birds itself, but the maritime connectivity. Actually, so this is something very important behind the transcultural movement of the birds. For example, there's some different kind of names, etymologies, because they were, because of religion, because of the different kind of religion, moved back and forth. So the main idea behind the transcultural movement of the bird, different kind of birds, were actually the maritime connectivity is very important. Because in Heidelberg, everyone talks about transculturality. What is transcultural, right? So it seems like we need some theories to, and we have to theorize to make the theoretical framework of this conference more transcultural. What is the driven factor behind these terms, taxonomies, and different etymologies, something like that. And thank you very much for bringing, made me aware of the importance of Southeast Asia. One thing, if you don't mind, if time permits, I want to share a very interesting story that I encountered many years ago. I did a paper on identification of the Chinese garden plants and how these plants were introduced to European botanical garden in the 18th century. So I did let's say 5 years research on that, identified this and that, and make a long list, and make a chart, and then publish it. And until one day I met a scholar of plant. He said, "How did you identify this species?" I said, "Through comparison of images." He said, "Really? You can't identify one single plant without seeing its roots." That's a science. So I realized that yesterday and today, many of us attempted to identify bird species, whether it's mythical or it's real birds. Fine, because we are historian, we are scholar of cultural histories. But I think it's for the future. Maybe we want to collaborate we're scholar from biology and from like
So it's
animal
expert.
behavior, bird actually, ornithologist, something like that. It will be very helpful.
That's a very good point. I have the same impression because, I mean, I did a kind of homework half year ago. I looked for owls in old Javanese texts and how people interpret them. Owl is something that you should consider, that's the owl basically. It's so easy to tell that the bird is the owl, it's not the eagle. But still, it's not that clear. If you look for the dictionaries, even in modern Javanese, and that's probably connected to what Tom presented yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yesterday, right? Sometimes the bird for the owl, even in one region in Java, can be used for related bird. So basically, I really believe that the effort to identify the birds on things like reliefs, even worse for abstract depictions like what Helen works on, is really difficult. It's just always a kind of shooting at a moving target. Basically, we will never know because simply that's why, for example, some depictions on Javanese temple reliefs have for decades been interpreted in this way. This is dove or cuckoo because it has the head of dove, the body of probably dove, but the tail is obviously not the tail of dove, but the tail of cuckoo. So it's longer and it's more robust, basically. The maneuver in the flight of cuckoo is more vigorous than of that of dove. So basically, I believe that we really need cooperation with biologists because they are in much better position to say, you ignorant guys, this is not cuckoo, this is just one species of dove that's rare and that also has a kind of very long feather tails. That may happen easily, why not? That would be enlightening, but at the same time, I believe that there are limits on interpretation of artwork in scientific terms. But all of us, we will try, because simply it's curiosity, right? It's just curiosity that drives us to at least try to identify the particular species. But anyone who would do a kind of exercise just to look at as many sources as possible about one particular depiction only would find that scholars interpret it in different ways. So basically, and that's the science, we always move, it's always in a kind of, process. But the process can be not speeded up, but made more enriching or more satisfying by including as many people as possible, I mean, with different specializations. So yeah, that would definitely help to include biologists, ornithologists, yeah.
True. I also add one more point. As I
Mentioned during the coffee break, for the zoo archaeology new discovery, especially from the shipwrecks right now, or also from the land archaeological sites, they also find birds' bones. So it's good for us to study, because when I work on the Mandarin Dust, I also find a lot of few guys on the birds in Southeast Asia, East Asia, Hong Kong, because I don't know the specific name of the birds. But another information for that is the zoo archaeology from the shipwreck. I think it can help us to identify the monsoon birds traveling across the maritime networking in East and Southeast Asia, even Indian Ocean world.
Important, yeah, that's a very good point.
So I didn't even know this. Zoo archaeology.
zoo archaeology.
Well,
zoo, Z-O-O, zoo
Yeah.
archaeology.
There is, yeah. For example, in the Tower of London, they recently excavated the skull of some large feline, and they interpreted the place as a menagerie of Richard III or whatever. I
Even
don't
for
know.
the
Feces, the poo-poo of the bird, if they keep it well. But you can also so identify through the DNA a different kind of composition analysis to know the nature of the bird. But yeah, because they are organic, so it may not help too much, but at least we can have interdisciplinary studies on the transcultural birds.
What a happy place where theses survive. In Java, it would be later impossible. Yeah. Ellen, some more comments?
I could share a few thoughts for what it's worth. No, I just to continue a little bit on what you guys are talking about, and Ming's suggestion to collaborate with ornithologists, more specifically, if I understood well, or zoo archaeologists. I mean, wonderful. I was telling Jiri how we are really, missing ethnographers as well. It's such a shame that Gregory Forth could not make it. But we've been talking in so many presentations about the Cendrawasih, the bird of paradise, and ethnographers from Papua and Borneo are, should probably be with us at some point as well to also tell us about the, names. I mean, all these peoples from Eastern Indonesia, especially, they still, it's not just imaginary. I mean, they still live with these birds. They steal their feathers. They wear them. It's a whole knowledge that is still very much living, and we're missing all this knowledge from these ethnographers probably. I just want to say a few things. Really, I mean, thank you so much, Radu and Jiri and HKBU. Jiri, I'm so grateful that you insisted so much. you know how to do that. I probably, like a lot of presenters today, I refused several times, I think, and it was a very, very happy. It's a very happy, heuristic experience for not just me, also for us. I think this realm of birds was quite foreign, to us. I'm thinking also of Dimas, who helped a lot with the PowerPoint. And for us, it's especially important because, so there are a few takeaways apart from the rich visual images that I learned of, hand ornaments, ceramic vessels, the funerary art we're working on, but also humoristic poems. I didn't realize that the richness and the satire also used by the Japanese to talk about these windbirds in a moment in this scientific moment. We're in the 18th century now. Those poems are from the 18th century.
Late 17th.
Late 17th, yeah. Well, so a moment where we are maybe a little bit early, but where we're in Europe taking all this very, very seriously, these discoveries and, the période des Lumières, discoveries and classifying scientific information, and how they laugh about it, how they take it with much humor, how these birds probably feed from wind and fort plum blossom. I mean, it's fantastic. And poetry and songs mentioned by Lydia Keevan, right? But to go back to, yes, we want to know what birds are because I raised the question: is this relevant? Is this a relevant question? To talk about birds in Southeast Asia. I think very much so. What we want to know is what they meant by bird and winged, feathered creatures. Maybe not just winged creatures, but as you mentioned, feathered creatures. It could be a larger category to include more species, more whatever, more things, creatures. If we want to look at other types, and just to mention also that it's a very understudied domain, for Southeast Asia compared to Europe. I mean, where it's so well studied, there's taxonomy, heraldic even. We know so little about heraldic in Southeast Asia, about with all these figures. I mean, a lot of the roundels that were shown might also, have something to do with the Haldik. I mean, there are our holy men from the early Islamic period. There are animals who come a little bit more often than others. What does it mean? Do they identify with these? Sometimes this is an open question. And so to know the imaginary. So what I want to say here, and I'll be briefer because we all want to have a drink, is that for Southeast Asia especially, I think it's very important to understand the imaginary of birds, because as to take back Merle Radcliffe's title, book title from called The Seen and Unseen World of Java, right? The unseen world is very much is as important as the seen world, and so how these birds or feathered or winged creatures lived, with men, or how men lived with those creatures, is also very much what we want to know. And in the early Islamic period, we want especially to know what happens when you die as a Muslim. What happens when when all the seen and unseen beings around you were created. What happens to these beings that were created in the Hindu context?
Okay.
What happens when you die as a Muslim? Are they still around? So what happens to these celestial, or unseen creatures? That's it for me. So thanks a lot to both of you for your invitation.
Can I have a quick comment? Just about feathers and defining birds, but I think it is the feathers that make it a bird.
Yeah.
Because the only other animal that had feathers is certain dinosaurs. And no other animal has feathers. It isn't actually flight that scientifically makes it a bird, because an ostrich doesn't fly, an emu doesn't fly, a cassowary doesn't fly.
Yeah.
A chicken or a peacock they fly a little bit, but they're considered ground birds. A peacock would be considered a ground bird. So the feathers beyond anything else is what defines the bird.
Yeah.
So it's either a real bird that has feathers or some mythological creature that has feathers. But if we want one characteristic, it would be feathers.
Can you have wings without? Can you have feathers without wings? Can you have feathers without wings? Because sometimes we do have wings without feathers.
Yeah, there are naked birds.
There are wingless birds.
I mean, in
actually.
our legendary creatures, there are wings. They sometimes bulls with their head,
Sure.
right? But they have wings, not necessarily feathers on those wings, but they're clearly wings with wings made of flames. So, for example, the whirls, right? And so if, I mean, it's a detail, but if the word wing is not in the title of the next whatever you guys organize,
well, I mean, I think if you're talking the supernatural, you can define it any way you want, because there's no science or specific culture or whatever to back it up. So you can say, well, it can only have feathered wings, or you could say it could be lightning bolts or feathers or whatever. I mean, because it's the realm of mythology and lore, and not. And I was also just thinking about, well, why focus on birds? But birds are, like, as a class, are an animal that is around everyone. Like urban dwellers, rural people in rural areas, everywhere in the world there's some kind of bird. So
and there is this curiosity. I remember, that would be my last word, then I would pass the microphone to Radu for his last word. I remember our state in Leiden, as we were both scholars in Leiden, invited scholars at, what was the name of the institute, basically?
Well, the large Center of Asia Transcultural.
And then we made sometimes trips from Leiden to Den Haag, and you always see, when you reach the train platform, you always see small birds hopping around. And we just laughed, and we told each other, okay, many people laugh, because you see many people passing, using escalator to get to their platform, and then all people spot these small birds, be it sparrows, I don't know, some small birds just hopping around. And all people laugh, and all people look at each other with a kind of pleasing feeling, oh yeah, that's a nice day, the birds are still around. So you don't do this with mammals, basically, or insects. So we are really, as human beings, we are strongly connected emotionally to birds, probably underconsciously. But I still remember very, very, very intensely the moment that you watch the birds around you, and then you watch the faces of people who you never met and probably you would never meet in your life, some bypassers who also use the same train on the same day, and they also laugh. And they smile at each other, So it's like the bird is, that's probably a kind of therapy, I don't know, but it's a kind of shared bonds that we have as humans with these winged creatures.
Yeah, not much to add. I think we open up a lot of kind of cross-pollination, right? So kind of common themes that we can all take back and think of the volume, the prospective volume, right? So kind of include this variety of perspectives on birds in our own papers. It's hard to keep that richness, right? You tend to focus on your own angle, but I hope we can keep that kind of wide lens and multiple lens in our, not just in our introduction, but in each of the papers. Yes, I look forward to working on this with you in a kind of text form, and kind of, putting out the volume and inspiring others to continue it. Okay, thank you. And so we're looking to the future. We're looking forward to the future, and just again, I want to thank everyone for participating, and also online presenters. And also, Betty and Jan.
Thank you.